Thanks, Joe and Alan. Okay, now we move into four presentations from four people with insights and experience to bring to us today. We start with Liz Skelton, and this is her topic. During the presentation, you might want to jot down some Slido questions along the way. At the end of the four presentations before morning tea, we'll have a Q&A session in the room, hopefully using Slido questions plus people from the floor. Let me introduce Liz to you, those of you who haven't met Liz before. Liz is the co-founder and director of Collaboration for Impact, which is Australia's leader in equipping communities in collaborative skills they need to deal with root cause social issues. Liz is renowned in Australia for her work over the past 15 years in adaptive social leadership with organisations in community, government and private sector. Additionally, she's been the CEO of some innovative social change networks. You might remember Streetwise Comics some years back. That was Liz's work. And in Scotland, an organisation called Drugs Education Peer Service, CREW 2000. Liz has co-authored a couple of books, The Australian Leadership Paradox, What It Takes to Lead in a Lucky Country, published in 2013. And interestingly, another one called Lost Conversations, Finding New Ways for Black and White Australians to Lead Together, published 2 years ago. And that was done with 5 Indigenous leaders in collaboration, co-authored with 5 Indigenous leaders. Liz also teaches leadership for collaborative systems at UNSW's Centre for Social Impacts in the Masters and Graduate Certificate Program. So please join with me in welcoming Liz Skelton to the podium. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks, Norman. Good morning, everyone. How are we all going today? It's quite a packed room in here. Everyone's okay? Yeah? Good and nodding? I want to also start by acknowledging where we are and acknowledging the country that we're gathering on today. And to pay my respects to elders past and present. I came out to Australia 18 years ago from Scotland, and I can remember the first kind of public gathering I went to when I heard the acknowledgement of country. And if I think about the work that I'm now doing, it struck me as really core to it. In acknowledging where we are, it brings us straight away into the context, into the present, and makes us think about where are we, not just respecting the land and the people who've gone before, but means whatever we do, we have to be present to that context. And I'd never heard that before. I'd never heard that in Scotland, and I found that it then starts to ground people in the work if we can remember that, and if we can stay present to why are we here, what is this land we're on, and what's important. I also want to acknowledge the diversity that's in the room today as well. Both the acknowledgement of country and diversity is really important in collaboration. So looking around the room, you know, we've got obvious diversity of gender, age, culture, lots of different colours of what we're wearing today, lots of different geographies, and probably a lot more diversity sitting under the surface. As we go through the day and the work of collaboration, the work is actually how do we bring that diversity to the surface? Because without that diversity, we can't actually come up with new ideas or thinking. So what I'm going to be walking through today is we talk about collaboration and we hear collaboration, and in lots of our funding arrangements, we're told we need to collaborate. But what does that actually mean, and what kind of impact is it we're really trying to get? So, as Norma said in the introduction, the work that I do in Collaboration for Impact, we set that up 4 years ago to walk alongside communities who are trying to tackle the root cause of a lot of the social issues we're in, where it's not just another program or adding other things of what we already do. It's how do we combine all of that effort to actually address the root causes of the problems? Because despite huge amounts of funding, huge amounts of money across a range of social issues in Australia, we're not really making any progress on shifting some of those indicators. So we started to explore, how do you do this? How do you set people up to be able to tackle root causes, deliver programs, but actually look at what does the combination of all these programs add up to, and how do we get a population level change to do. That's very different work. It requires different skills, and it requires long-term, staying in it long-term, but also measuring, thinking about the work very differently. So what I'm going to be sharing with you today is what we've learned over the last 4 years and a lot of the work that we're doing, but what does it look like if we want to try and collaborate to get a collective impact? So to kick off, what is collective impact? And again, you know, we're hearing the language, but actually, what does it mean if we're trying to get collective impact? So we've just got a short video they can describe it better than I can. If it starts. Yeah?
The number and complexity of challenges facing our world can be overwhelming. When individual organizations attempt to tackle the most daunting problems, success stories are all too rare. Many innovative approaches have been tried, too few have worked. However, when organizations work together under the right conditions, they can accomplish great things. One particularly effective means of collaboration is collective impact. Using the collective impact approach, a number of complex social challenges have been addressed, and some remarkable results have been achieved. Youth incarcerations dropped by 45% in just 3 years, with no change in public safety, improving the lives of thousands of youths. 6,000 public housing residents were placed in new jobs during the recession. More than 1,000 acres were restored and over 280 million pounds of pollution voluntarily reduced to conserve and restore a river. Organizations utilizing a collective impact approach do the following. Agree to a common goal. Agree to track progress in the same way, which allows for continuous improvement. Do what each does best while identifying new ways to work together. Have consistent communication. And finally, have skilled and dedicated resources to support ongoing efforts. The world's toughest challenges aren't going away. In fact, many experts predict they will continue to grow in both number and complexity. Solving these problems requires a range of expertise from a number of diverse organizations. Collective impact is a proven approach, helping organizations work together to move mountains.
So just before I go into it, can I just get a show of hands of how many people are involved in or have heard of collective impact? Yeah, great. A few then? Fantastic. Okay. So there were some American examples there. A lot of the work that's kicked off on this, so I'm going to pick up Alan's cue on going global first before we go local. So the US and Canada are probably maybe 10 years ahead of us on this work, but I guess the good news is that we are catching up in Australia. Probably over the last 5 years, collective impact initiatives have started to pop up more and more. So what I'm going to share is just a bit of an overview of what are we seeing here in Australia, and I'll go the right way to do that. And these are kind of 5 top things we're observing about what's happening. So if you are in a collective impact, or you're thinking that the work that you're doing on the ground in the CDATs has the opportunity to be a collective impact, then these are things to be considering as you do it. So we did a scan last year, and there's probably around about 75 different types of collaborative change processes. They're not all collective impact. There's a lot happening in place-based, we hear people call localization, a whole range of things, but where people are trying to tackle to get large-scale population level change. The communities are saying, how can we really develop the change that we're trying to see? How can we really scale that and spread that? So we're not just impacting a small group of people, but we're changing conditions on the ground in our communities. And that's really what collective impact is. It's changing the conditions of it. And the more that I do this work, you know, we talk about how we make change, and actually, I think that what we get is nudges. We're able to have wee nudges of change, which accumulate to make a big change. And there's moments of it. And all we can really do is influence the conditions in communities. We can't change other people, but we can change conditions. So what we're seeing, and the work that we're involved in, there's about 6 collective impact initiatives in New South Wales, and one in Burke that we're working with, which is around justice reinvestment. And that's been led by elders and by the community there. That's about 4 years in. There's one in Dubbo, which is just in the early days, that's starting around taking the same approach around justice reinvestment. And the others that we're in are mainly Victoria, Cherbourg up in Queensland, there's one starting there. So what we're talking about here is the type of impact that changes outcomes for the whole population. And what we're addressing are the conditions, the behaviours, and the relationships between people. So as it said on that video, people are still doing the work that they're good at, but they're doing it in a different way by how they work together. So what we're seeing, most are place-based, they've got that geographical boundary, some are around issues. Almost all have some form of backbone, so some kind of collaborative coordination of the backbone, and that's really core, that without that, most collaborative efforts will fall over. And what we're seeing is more funding going into those backbones as well. The most common issues are looking at early childhood, young people. But how do we start early and get early intervention? So what we're seeing is we're hearing a lot about we want to collaborate and we want change, but often we don't want to change ourselves. Yeah, so we hear this, we think other people have to change and other ways of working have to change, government has to change, local community organisations have to change, but we don't have to change. So what we're seeing in that is that people are agreeing, okay, we no longer can be fragmented, we need to coordinate responses more, we need to share data more, we need to, they're seeing that we've got to actually learn into this rather than bring our current expertise, because complex problems, we don't necessarily know how to address them. And people are agreeing that we need a greater risk for appetite for innovation. But yet, the practice on the ground still seems to be when it comes to we've got to protect our brand, our logo, our funding, whatever it is we don't want to do the changing. So the work of collective impact really is about starting there. And again, Uncle Bill spoke to this around the sitting, the listening, sitting still, but also thinking about what is our work in this, that until we see that if we are part of the system we're trying to change, then we're also part of the problem. So there is something in the way we're working that we need to shift. The other trend that we're seeing is this question about power. And when we're talking about collective impact or place-based work, there's a real question about, are we ready to share power? And usually this is where, a lot of these initiatives have been top-down from government or from other entities as opposed to bottom-up from community. So if you're going to collaborate, it really is about loss of a number of things. We're talking about the gains we can get by doing it, but we very rarely talk about the fact that by collaborating, we're going to lose things like attribution. So can I say that this impact was because of me and my organisation? What we're moving to is something which is much more about a collective impact as opposed to it needing to be about one organisation acting alone. Kind of moving from this idea of where we can have a competitive advantage that is what traditionally we've been in when we've been competing for funding against other organisations, as opposed to in collective impact where there's a need for pooling resources and leveraging the fact that you've got lots of people on board in the community who all have different types of influence that we can leverage for the community we're working on behalf of. And this kind of shift around being an expert versus having a shared understanding of what the issue is. Because not one organisation knows. So a lot of the collective impact initiatives we're in, you might have education, health, community at the table. No one sector has the answers. What we need is to bring all of those different plays together. But that means people have got to let go a bit of expertise or of control around there's a certainty or a comfort in believing that my way is the right way. So So what tends to happen in collective impact, people go for fairly predictable program delivery, which absolutely have an impact, but it's for a small number of people in the community, versus over the long term, how do we get more comfortable with discomfort, uncertainty, where we don't know what this is going to look like, but we're going to work together to figure it out. So the key one, and I think this is really important in collective impact, is around this idea of sharing power with community, where community is not just consulted or engaged for particular parts of the collaboration, but they're co-producers of both defining what the problem is and they're co-creators in addressing the problem. And that's quite a shift from how traditional programs work. Not all of them, some programs have that as a central theme. Now, as Norman said, you know, the work that I was doing before going into collective impact has always had that thread. In Scotland, when I worked with young people who were drug users, they came up with their own education information. They ran the organisation and employed me. In Streetwise, the whole model was about going to the people you're trying to reach for them to define the story. And the power of that has really stayed with me through the work that I do. And it's really the essence of collective impact. So what we see a lot of the time is, and this isn't, I'm not saying this is a blame, it's actually the way that we work. What we're trying to do is go, well, how do we shift that? That often we'll start kind of top down, and we bring together service providers and we decide what the problem is. Then we go out and test that with people in community. As opposed to thinking about, if we want to get really system change, population level change, how do we have citizens in there, i.e. people who aren't paid to show up, but citizens involved in both defining the problem and coming up with the solutions. Where we're seeing outcomes in Australia is when community are driving the issues, they're leading it. So Burke's a great example of that, where they have, they basically, when they kicked off, said to government, we don't want any funding in here, we want to figure this out ourselves. And so government and other organisations had to play a very different role in that collective impact initiative. So the key thing here is thinking about, and we very rarely talk about power, but I'd say it's the key to it, is are we really willing to share power with community? And what does that mean? And because people may then come up with ideas, initiatives that we're not sure about. It has to be based on data and it has to be based on evidence. But fundamentally, it's how do you use that data and evidence and then put that in the hands of community and have services around that to support it. The other condition we see is what we call kind of premature agenda setting, which basically means we jump straight to defining the issue or the program that we're going to address. So initiatives will go straight to that definition. And what we're saying is hold off on trying to set the agenda too soon. Because when that happens, what hasn't happened is the work to build and strengthen preconditions for collective impact. That work of strengthening that community really pays off. So if you've already got an agenda, have you also found, supported and convened a diverse group of leadership from all parts of the system? Have you built trust, learning, a shared understanding of what it means to work in complexity where we don't have the answers and we've got to collaborate? Again, it's quite different from bringing a group of experts to the table to bring their own part to it. Have you decided to establish new ways of working and then challenge the existing norms and the ways of doing things? Because without that, we're going to just do what we've always done. That's what we do as human beings. And without any urgency, and urgency is really important, is there any heat on this issue? Because there's so many competing issues. So how are you keeping this issue on the agenda and making sure there's urgency, but equally that you've got authorization for the way of working? So are the key people in community who've authorized it, who provide that kind of environment to do the work? So if you haven't, we would say slow down, take the time. And this is really challenging when we have this dominance and seduction of program thinking, that we tend to go straight to the programs we know how to do. It's ingrained in the way that we get funded, it's the way that we report on our outcomes. It doesn't help us get system change. What it does is help us produce lots and lots of programs. So what we're seeing across Australia again is we love programs. What we're saying is if you think about your way of working is maybe it's not about another program. Maybe it's about how do you leverage all the work and the programs on the ground that are already happening, but actually working differently together. So when we do focus on just one program, it only addresses one part of the system, and it's usually service provision. What it seeks to do is largely coordinate existing activities. So what we see is you end up with service integration, so you might have health, education, community working better together, and that's really important. But again, it's not going to address the whole system. And what we see is people using evidence as a way of avoiding taking risks. I.e. we go, there's a really great initiative happening over there or in that country. If we just apply it on the ground, it's going to work here. And then we wonder why it doesn't work, because we haven't come back to where are we, what's the context, what's the land that we're on, what's needed right here, given the nature of the place we're in, as opposed to somewhere different. So, I'll just go back. So the most important thing I guess we're seeing is that the good news is there's a lot of this work happening, we're trying it, we're trying different ways. The backbone function is being valued. People are starting to share data. It's getting easier. There's less kind of turf wars around that, but they're still happening. And the policy environment is shifting to enable much more place-based ways of working. Because until we are funded to do place-based work, to get place-based system outcomes, we'll keep doing programs because that's what we have to report back on. So we're working with government on what does that look like to have more flexible funding arrangements, to have more flexible procurement ways of bringing people together. And if we want people to collaborate, how do we then build their capacity to do that and not just assume we can do it? We can collaborate with people who see the world the way we do, but it's hard when we bring different players together, and that's exactly what we need. So I'm just going to jump ahead a wee bit because I'm getting the wind up, and I'll be going into some of this in the workshop I'm doing, but I just want to focus on this piece. So the work of collective impact is relationships, trust building, the stuff we call the soft stuff, which is the hardest thing to do, is to build relationships and trust with people who see the issue and the problem very differently to us. Build connections with people, identify leadership, and really build a culture of learning that the only way we're going to address this is if we learn into it. So finally, I'm going to end on a quote. I don't know who Eric Hoffer is, but I really liked this quote, which is that in times of change, the learners win, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. So if we want to tackle the challenges we face in front of us, really we all need to learn and share together into that. So I wish you well with that. Sorry I've rushed through it, but there'll be time to go into it more. Thank you.